everything on paper was perfect. Loving family, loving wife, great career, things were booming, and I was miserable. And I even would go out dancing, had lots of friends, would travel, miserable, constantly. Going to bed saying, you know what, if I don't wake up, that'll be perfectly fine.
It's estimated that 20 million Americans struggle with substance use disorder, and I used to count myself among those 20 million Americans as an individual who struggles with substance use disorder. My journey took me to multiple treatment centers, several different prisons, and a lot of run-ins with the criminal justice system. And not until I found recovery at age 20 did I realize my true purpose. My purpose in life has been to help people find recovery. My name's Chris Dreisbach. Welcome to Repurposed. All right, so let's start out. You want to talk a little bit about your early life?
Sure. I was born at a very young age, very traumatic. Sure, what do you want to start with?
I don't know. How about any stories, anything notable, any events?
Well, I tell people I knew I was a libertarian looking back very early on because I changed my name to Spike when I was 3 years old. I had a much older brother from my dad's first marriage, so he was almost more like an uncle. He was well into his teens, and I was, 3. He was, I think, 18, and I was 3. And my actual name is Jeremy. And he convinced me, wasn't hard, I was 3. Again, when you hear this story, just keep in mind, I'm 3. And he said, oh, Jeremy is a girl's name. I don't know why they named you that. But it's like, Julie and Jenny and, Jeremy. And so it's a girl's name, and it's very sad. I don't know why they did that. And so I was devastated. I did not want to be Jeremy. I was very resistant to the name Jeremy. And then we went and saw a movie with a character named Spike in it. I fell in love with the character, and it was a whole, manipulative plot device character, and I fell in love with the whole thing. And I told my parents, I'm Jeremy now, or I'm Spike now. And they were like, yeah, sure, Jeremy, that's great. And I was so determined at 3 years old to be Spike that it started worrying them. And they took me to my doctor to make sure I wasn't like, a psychopath or, brain tumor or something. And after talking with me, he's like, he tells my parents, you know how he is. He's very, kind of hard-headed. Just call him Spike. It's a phase. I'm now 40.
That's a good one. It kind of leads into my next thing.
Oh, does it? Wow.
It might shock you, but this is going to lead into the next thing. Were there any
Fantastic.
Any indicators of any of the things to come in your life?
Well, that was definitely one of them. But I would say an indicator to come was that I always tended to do things differently than everyone else. Some of it was just because I would look for what I thought was the best way, but some of it was just I would look and see what everyone else is doing and go, I'm going to do the opposite of that just because I can, and someone probably told me I couldn't. Again, very libertarian, very early on. And so like an example of that was I was told, you can't work until you're 15. And so I asked my parents when I was 13, can I go and work? And they're like, yeah, I guess during the summer if you want to. So I went and found a job bussing tables and washing dishes, it's completely illegal and under the table at a nearby oyster bar. And I would either walk or bike over there, and I would do that. And then when I was doing that work, I learned a lot of incredible things. I learned the value of money because I was the only person in my peer group that had my own money. I learned the value of networking because I learned that the wait staff there would tip me out if I was nice to them or helped them with stuff. But another thing I learned was I watched other people who were 2 or even 3 times my age who were doing the same thing I was doing. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that. And then I would hear the other workers there, the wait staff, who usually were like college kids, complaining about what they were going through in college and how much it was costing and everything. And I thought, I don't think I want to do that either. And so while most of my other friends were either thinking about going into the military or going to college or something like that, I decided at 16 that I wanted to start a business. And that's what I did. I started my first business was a web design company. So pretty much from the beginning, I've always done things my own way, and that's continued on to today.
It's almost like you're reading my mind because my next question was about web design.
Wow.
And what interested you in that? What was your passion? What drove you towards web design?
So it wasn't really that I had a passion about web design. It was more that I looked at what could I continue to do at home and not have to purchase a storefront, which I didn't have the money for. I was a kid. What didn't require me to get any kind of degrees or too much kind of licensing or anything like that. All I needed was a business license. I didn't get that initially anyway. What could I teach myself? Get the software and learn how to do it myself. And then what was something I could do at the age of 16 that anyone would even remotely take me seriously on? And, website design in the late 90s was just a new edgy enough thing that someone would look at a teenager and go, yeah, it makes sense that a teenager would be doing that. And just looking back, the sheer chutzpah of driving around in my '86 LeBaron with the AC that didn't work. Actually, it works sometimes. And driving around with my used laptop that my mom gave me, and the software that I put in it, and talking to people who did not know what websites were and had no concept of why they'd need one, and basically selling the proverbial ice to an Eskimo. Selling websites to folks. In retrospect, what the hell was I thinking? But it ended up being successful. And I mean, that was a big part of what brought me to this. But it wasn't really a passion for web design. I actually hate coding. I'm not a typical computer IT nerd. I learned just enough to be able to do it proficiently. My thing is sales and marketing and business development. That's been my background. Web design was just the most expedient thing for that at that age.
I was wondering if you actually had a passion for web design.
I'm not sure if anyone has a passion for web design. But actually there are a lot of I remember seeing this ad for, it was a while, many years, probably 20 years back, and it was like to recruit people into IT work, and they were like, do you dream and code? And I'm like, well, I have nightmares about code, but I don't know. I don't dream and code. I have nightmares about having to do coding. I was like the opposite of an IT nerd. I just learned enough to be proficient to make basic web design. The moment that I reached a point where I could start outsourcing it to other people and just focus on the sales, business ownership and development and marketing and networking and all that, I immediately did that. That was not my passion. It was just a good way to make money. It was an open market too.
Good timing as well.
It was good timing. No one else was making websites in this area for small businesses. It was also a time in my life where I could offer my services for free for the first, almost a year, about 6 months. And what that did was that gave me a huge, wide portfolio. It won over a lot of skeptics. It got word of mouth, and it made me already busy. It created scarcity. So now when I go to someone, not only can I charge full price, but I can say, and I need to know if you're going to want to do this within the next week or so, because I'm already filling up my slots for this month. And so it did. In retrospect, I was doing all the things that people go and get MBAs to learn how to do. So
that's a whole lot like my story, because I started in business and I didn't even really know what I was doing. I was just trying to help people.
Yes.
And solve a problem.
Yep.
So I can relate to that on a lot of levels.
Yeah, absolutely.
So sticking with the business tune, do you want to fast forward through towards the end of when you sold the business, and then we can knock the business stuff out of the way?
Sure. I mean, so just to let you know, my getting clean stuff happened before that, so I don't know the timeline of how you want to do so.
That's even perfect then.
Okay.
You want to talk about addiction?
Sure,
kind of
absolutely.
How you slipped into it, and let's go there then.
In retrospect, I'm sure there was like some personal familial trauma stuff that led to me getting involved in drugs, and probably some family predisposition towards it as well. But at the time, I just thought I was doing what cool kids were doing. I was smoking weed, I was smoking cigarettes, I was drinking, and occasionally doing pills and stuff like that. And that's what cool people did, and it felt good. I didn't really put a lot of thought into why I was doing it, and I never really considered myself an addict, because I had a very loving, supportive family. I was in no kind of criminal trouble. I had this business that was actually developing and booming, and I actually tell myself some of the stuff I do helps me stay up, which was true. Some of these things are actually pretty effective to do a bunch of coding work that you didn't want to do. So I kind of convinced myself that, well, this is just what I do. Some people drink, some people do this, some people do that. I do some, different drugs. And it was in my, it was in around 2005, 2006. So I would now be, I got to do math now. I would have been around 24 or 23. And I realized, I think that I've reached a plateau in business where the drugs are holding me back. So at first I kind of stopped doing the harder stuff. And that was a lot easier than one would think. Maybe probably because I was still doing other drugs. That I didn't really have any kind of withdrawals or any of the things you hear when people say they're dropping, like opioids and things like that. I didn't really have any of that. It was more like, wow, I actually feel a lot better. And then I thought, you know what? If I could do that, I think I'll back off from smoking weed. I'll stop smoking weed. That was the tough one. For me anyway. Smoking weed, or stopping smoking weed, was the one that had me unable to eat and throwing up and feeling sick, only for maybe a couple weeks at its worst. But the interesting thing was when I stopped doing it, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just do it one other time. Anytime I tried doing it after that, I didn't feel good. I'd feel paranoid. I'd feel kind of out of it. I'd feel tired. And I'm like, well, I've already stopped. I might as well just stop for good. And I had never been that much of a drinker. But I noticed that, once I stopped those things, I'd say, you know what, I'll have a glass of wine. And a glass of wine turned into, I remember there was one night, I wasn't even paying attention, and I had a small glass of wine. And I thought, I'll have another one before I go to bed. And I went back and I had polished off 2 bottles of Riesling and hadn't realized it. And I thought, oh, I see where this is going. So then I stopped doing that. And that was relatively easy as well. And it's an interesting thing about my sobriety journey compared to other people. I never really had a rock bottom. I never really had I thought I was going to die from the withdrawals. I didn't have any kind of legal trouble, and I'm blessed to say that. But it turns out that there are a lot of people who are deeply in addiction and only realize it in retrospect, or from hearing someone else's story and realizing, oh, that's addiction too. And if I had continued doing it long enough, I'm sure it would have affected my career and relationships and legal troubles and everything else. But thankfully, I was one of the few that was able to notice it and stop it before all of that happened. And I'm grateful for it. I've been clean up. That this year will be, I'll be coming up on 17 years that I've been sober, and I'm very, very grateful for it.
That's pretty awesome stuff.
Yeah, man.
I feel like if I could do math, I'm like right around 16 or 17 years.
Cool.
I'm not sure which one, but it was, I think when I did your podcast, we talked about that, and our dates were like
almost
dangerously close to each other.
Yeah. And I don't have an exact date. I just remember like early 06, late 05 I started thinking about it. Early 06 I stopped some of the harder stuff. Sometimes springtime 06, summertime 06 I stopped with the weed. And then towards the mid-end of 06 I realized that drinking would become a problem if I didn't stop that too. And yeah, I'm grateful for it. But at the time I just thought I was trying it out to see, maybe it would help me work a little bit better.
So I know you said you didn't hit any rock bottom, but I know since you've struggled with addiction, you had to have some moments of despair. There had to be moments where you just knew you weren't going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the feelings associated with that? Maybe some of the negative feelings that you might have experienced during that time.
What's interesting is, looking back, it was after I stopped, and this is why I say that I think that there was some social or familial trauma or predilection, genetic predilection for it, because it was afterwards I started feeling kind of crappy, and obviously the drugs were masking that, and it was coming into Even after I met my incredible now wife, Tasha, about a year later, and got into a relationship with her and then later married her, business is doing fantastic. Everything on paper was perfect. Loving family, loving wife, absolutely beautiful, incredible wife, and thankfully still have her. Have no idea what she sees in me, but had a great career. Things were booming, and I was miserable. And we even would go out dancing, had lots of friends, would travel, miserable constantly, going to bed saying, you know what, if I don't wake up, that'll be perfectly fine. And in retrospect, I realized it was because I was living a largely purposeless life. I remember looking at a meme or a cartoon or whatever, and it showed a person who had a dollar bill hanging from almost like a fishing pole that was attached to a guy's head, and he was running after it, and just a few feet in front of him was an open grave with a tombstone, presumably with his name on it. And I thought, and I remember how sad that made me, because I thought, that's me. I'm chasing money, lots of money, and living a comfortable life doing so, but one day I'm going to be dead. And I sort of buried it, and it was sort of this fleeting thought. And then I started having lots of problems that initially they thought were, either depression or anxiety or whatever. And it tracked because I was dealing with a lot of depression and anxiety. But it became increasingly obvious that's not what it was. Coming into 2014, when the right side of my body went numb, and then I had an MRI that confirmed I had some neurological damage that looked like MS, that started the next 2 years of this sort of MS purgatory before I had an actual diagnosis. And I was completely miserable. I felt like my life was falling apart. Why me? Now I'm dealing with this incurable neurodegenerative disorder. I'm going to end up in a wheelchair. I'm going to lose everything. The great moment in my life was shortly after they officially diagnosed me, when someone sat me down and talked with me about my treatment options. And they said, the purpose of your treatment is to slow down the rate of the progression of your MS so that it's not much more than the typical aging process. And that was supposed to make me feel better. Oh, I'll be back to status quo. That hit me like a ton of bricks, because I realized in that moment, it doesn't matter if I have MS. It doesn't matter if I'm in perfect health. Eventually, we're all going to age and die. Like, eventually, we're all not going to be here. And as depressing as that was, it was the shock that I needed and had needed for years to realize that you have to have a purpose in life. It has to have mattered that you were here. And while you're here, your body demands purpose. Your mind demands purpose. We get so bogged down in finances and familial stuff and social things and political things and all sorts of other stuff. But if you don't have a purpose, your body feels like you're already dead and walking. And it makes you miserable. It makes you listless. It leads you to things like addiction and unsafe and unhealthy thinking. I was dealing with all of that stuff. And so in retrospect, that MS that I deal with to this day, and I grimace to say it because I don't wish MS on my worst enemy. In retrospect, it was a blessing. Because if I hadn't had that wake-up call that has forced me to now seek purpose, I'd still be living like a zombie and I'd be miserable.
How many times do you think about your purpose?
We're kind of conditioned not to. Because the people who, and I don't want to get into a whole black helicopter tinfoil hat thing.
Put your tinfoil hat on before you speak, please.
The reptilian overlords who run this planet and feed off of our adrenochrome. No, the thing is that there are powerful people who need cogs in their machine. And the best way to make someone a cog in their machine is to keep them comfortable, fat and happy I call it, but keep them comfortable, keep them just miserable enough that they keep doing stuff to get whatever it is they think they need, convince them that this consumerist culture is what they need. You're not unhappy. You just need the newest shoes, the newest clothes, the newest watch, the newest phone, the newest car, the newest house, the newest whatever. And whatever your station is in life is what they're telling you need the newest of. If you're down here, you need the newest shoes. If you're up here, you need the newest jet or the newest yacht or whatever. But it's all the same thing. It's people who are living a largely purposeless life, who don't truly have fulfillment and are filling it with things. And ironically, the people selling them those things are probably doing the same thing. It's a whole food chain of people living in misery. And it's because the alternative is to take a real look inwards and break yourself down and say, who am I? Not who was I told I was before I was even able to talk, or who was I told I was supposed to be through my early childhood and my adolescence and my teenage years. Not who did I convince myself I really was supposed to be during my pubescent rebellious phase and coming into my 20s. Not who did I finally settle on saying I was going to be into my mid to late 20s. Not who am I trying to figure out now that I'm in my quarter life or midlife or post-midlife crisis, but who actually am I? What do I care about? What moves me? What am I good at? What do I hate or just aren't particularly good at? What am I attracted to? What are the things that drive me and draw me to them? Those are the things that we have to do to find purpose. And that requires us to take a personal inventory that a lot of us are really scared to take. We've got a lot of trauma. We've got a lot of, we call it the sunken cost fallacy. I'm already in this much, I better just keep throwing money at it. Well, we have that with our lives too. I can't back off of this. I've been doing it for the last 20 years. One of the most difficult decisions I ever made was to give up on my businesses, even though I knew they were killing me, because they were how I made money. And I had been building these things for, at that point, almost 20 years, 18 years. 18 years. And I realized that if I didn't do that, I'd continue going on the path to misery. Again, it took MS to get me to do that. If it had just been someone saying, your blood pressure's way too high, your cholesterol's still high, you're starting to get in your 30s, and that's not a good idea, I'd still be doing this right now. They'd be saying you're 40 years old, you're 100 pounds overweight, your blood pressure's bad, your cholesterol's terrible, you're starting to look pre-diabetic, you probably need to do something about this. I go, yeah, I'll deal with that when I'm retired. I'm making money right now, and still be miserable. It forced the reality that if I didn't change something, I was going to end up dead or bedridden or in a wheelchair, to force me to do things that made me cut off all of my bad time investments and life investments up to that point. And that's often what we have to do. It might force us to look at a relationship that we've been in for a long period of time that's toxic and not feeding us, and say, you know what? I know I've had however many years or even decades into it, but this isn't serving me. And it never was. And it's actually keeping me from fulfilling my purpose. It forces you to take a look at your entire life and realize that there are many things that you haven't been doing right, and things that you've been putting way too much time into that are not serving you and are actually distracting you from your purpose, and then doing it. Not just realizing it, but then doing it. So it is a horrifying thing, or could be a horrifying thing. And that's why I try to talk to young people about this stuff, because the earlier you do it, the less of that buildup you have. But no, the alternative to walking away from, overly consumerist culture and actually looking for your purpose in life is to do some serious introspection that a lot of people aren't ready to do.
But it's kind of cool that you say all that stuff, and not just, not for this specifically, but I had that same experience.
Yeah.
Like a year and a half or 2 years ago, where I was 370 plus pounds and making a lot of money and focusing on those things and doing those things. And I started to feel not so great.
Yep.
And, it took a doctor to tell me that I was probably going to, not live very long at 370 plus pounds.
It's incredible what that does,
and, I had to look at that a little bit, and I made some changes, and I'm down to 290, and
nice.
I'm not dead yet. So, but it's really cool because that new feeling has allowed me renewed purpose.
Yep.
And it's just so cool to hear you say that.
Yeah,
so.
It is a very powerful thing, and it can sometimes be a horrifying thing like that. You're going to die soon if you don't change. That's really the thing that will make people make a lot of change. You're going to die, and it's not you're going to die 50 years from now, 60 years from now. You're not. It's some magical moment that never comes. You continue living. You can in this moment continue living in this trance that you're the only immortal person to ever exist, and you'll escape death like no one else has been able to figure out before you. But you're going to die now, or in a year, or in 5 years, or as it took for me, someone going, it doesn't matter if you had MS or not, you're going to die anyway. That was the thing that made me realize, holy crap, if I don't make changes, I'm just going to be miserable till I die. Maybe it's tomorrow, maybe it's 70 years from now, but I'm going to be miserable that whole time. Why? Why would I do that? Why would I not realize what isn't serving me now or no longer serving me, and then refocus on what can serve me and do that introspection to find that out? And I've increasingly, when I'm talking, I do a lot of public speaking, and there's only so many ways you can say that the government's bad, right? So I'm increasingly, when I'm talking to, especially young leadership groups and stuff like that, I'm talking to these kids, they're anywhere from 18, 19 to 25. They already know everything I could tell them about the government, leadership skills, all this stuff, or they're being told this stuff by people who are even better at it than me. But I doubt that there's anyone talking to them about stripping down who they are at a very early age when they're still developing that and saying, you're not who your parents told you were when you were 2 and 3. You're not who you decided you would cut the bargain with between what they were saying and what you wanted. You aren't what you rebelled to be in your teens, and you aren't even necessarily that now. Here's the work that you have to do to find out who it is that you are, what you're about, what you want to do, and how you do it. And it's one of the most fulfilling things that I do.
Do you want to talk about any challenges that you face living with MS and being a person in recovery?
So the biggest challenges I face with MS now have less to do with the MS and more to do with the lifestyle changes I've done to cope or to ameliorate the effects of the MS, to put my MS in remission and keep it in remission. I've been in remission for this year, it'll be 6 years. And to actually heal from the damage that was done in that few years that I had it without any kind of treatment or knowledge of what was happening. So I have a very strict diet. It's easier to list the things I can eat than the things I can't eat. And I don't have cheat days or cheat meals. I always eat that way. I pretend that those things are things I'm highly allergic to just to keep from eating them ever. I try to exercise about an hour a day. I do a tremendous amount of mindfulness and meditation. I do active gratitude practices. I spend as basically a part-time job every day doing wellness stuff, eating right, meal planning, exercise, meditation, mindfulness, active gratitude, stoicism, doing my various mental practices on things. And it's incredibly rewarding. It's helpful. I do supplementation. I do sun exposure for vitamin D production. I do all this stuff, and it's great. But it's relatively taxing. It's a lot of stuff. I'm doing the work. But it allows me to be someone who's had MS probably for about a decade now, confirmed for over 6 years now, and be markedly healthier than I was a decade ago. So it's more than worth it, but it's definitely a challenge. But at this point, the MS itself, I tell people if you suddenly felt the way I feel right now, you'd call 911. But I'm used to the things that I deal with. It's mostly minor sensory stuff, weird sensations and pains. I deal with some weakness, but that's actually gotten better slowly over time. So it's mostly just sensory stuff, and I've just gotten used to it. Sometimes this hand feels like sandpaper. Sometimes it feels weird making certain motions with my mouth when I talk. Sometimes it doesn't. I've gotten used to it. I can function fully. If I didn't tell you, you'd have no idea. And like I said, I'm healthier now by all measures than I was 15, 20 years ago when I was half this age and when I didn't have MS.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. You want to talk about the 2020 campaign? Where did the idea come from? And then just walk me through whatever you want to talk about with it.
Sure. So a little bit of background. I realized when I started doing that work on, well, what is it that I find purpose from? What fulfills me? And I realized that the thing that excites me more than anything else is helping people, but not just helping them, but helping them to realize what created the problem they're facing, and then talking about solutions to those things so that we're not just putting Band-Aids on those things, but we're actually finding the source of that problem and then addressing that so that neither they nor anyone else has to deal with this. And that very often goes into politics. I look at the things that are happening in government, and I very clearly see that the things that we're facing are as a direct result of too much power being centralized into the hands of far too few people. They don't have accountability for it. They have almost unlimited power and control. They have this presumption of authority over all of our lives, and lo and behold, they abuse it. And so much of what we face is solved, or at least greatly ameliorated, by simply taking back that power and decentralizing it back into the hands of us, the people it always belonged to. And so that led to me getting involved in podcasting. This was back before, now the trope is you're not a real libertarian until you've had a podcast. I was back when not everyone had a podcast. But I started podcasting back around 2018. And I started developing a fairly decent, modest following. I was no Joe Rogan or anything like that. If you didn't hear of my show before I invited you on, I forgive you. It was not a gigantic show. But it had a decent following, especially in the liberty movement. And the longer I spent on it, the more it grew. And then one day, I had the quirkiest human being I've ever had on my show, a man by the name of Vermin Supreme. And Vermin Supreme, for those who don't know, Vermin Supreme has been running for president on and off since 1992, I believe. He wears a boot on his head. He promises people free ponies. He says that we're going to get unlimited power by harnessing the perpetual power of the undead, the zombies. He says that he's going to throw people in camps if they don't brush their teeth. And all of these are allegories for the false promises that come from politicians, the threats of harm if you don't do things that are healthy, but why is the government threatening you? All of these things have a purpose to them, but at first blush, it looks like an absolutely insane clown acting like an insane clown. And so I had him on my show. We had a really cool talk about what he's doing and why he was running. And at that time, he was running for the Libertarian Party's nomination for president. Before anyone laughs, he tied for second. So laughs, I guess he had the last laugh there. But so about a month later, after spending some more time with him, he came down to South Carolina for our convention, and we hung out some more. He and his team asked me to run as his proposed running mate. And I thought, well, that's funny. I went to my wife, who I was sure would say absolutely not. She said, oh, yeah, you'll have fun with that. That'll be fun. Now, keep in mind, I'm running with, and just to let you know, the way our system works, our delegates choose the presidential candidate, and then the next day, they choose the vice presidential candidate. Our presidential candidate does not pick their running mate. They can ask for a running mate, but it's up to the delegates to decide who they want. So I went into this thinking, my running mate has a boot on his head and talks about ponies and zombies. I'm not going to get this. I have serious answers for things, but I also like to goof off and not take myself too seriously. And, I talked about giving free cheesy bread with the purchase of any explosives permit. I said that, sure, we'll go back in time and kill baby Hitler, like Vermin said, but first we're going to go back in time and kill baby Woodrow Wilson. And I bet you'll find we don't even have to worry about Hitler. And, I'd say all these different silly things, but then I'd go to these conventions and say the funny stuff and stand next to Vermin and do all that. But then they'd ask me a serious question and I'd give them a serious answer. And I'd say, listen, if you want to ask me about cheesy bread and ponies and zombies, I'll give an answer about cheesy bread and ponies and zombies. If you want to ask me about trade policy or the national debt or taxation or the immigration or something like that, I'll give an answer about that. You ask me a dumb question, I'll give you a dumb answer. You want a serious one, I'll give you a serious one. And more importantly, fully aware that I was not going to get the nomination, because I was running with the guy with the boot on his head, who also definitely was not going to get it. I thought, well, here's an opportunity with no skin in the game to say, here are serious problems with how the Libertarian Party is messaging. Here are serious gaps in things that we could be and should be doing, door-knocking tours, messaging to communities we've never talked to, reaching out to college students. Here are all these things we could and should be doing, and if we are doing it, we should be doing even more of it, and here are some ways that we could do it. I must have done a good job at that, because then they actually picked me to be the vice presidential candidate. So it wasn't until about maybe 2 or 3 weeks before that I realized I was actually going to get the thing. And just looking at the whip count and everything, realizing I think I just became the VP candidate. And so after it happened, obviously it took a very hard pivot to a much more serious run. But it was with the same vibe behind it to begin with, that we need to be doing these serious things. We need to be doing them in a way that demonstrates that we have solutions that no one else has, but then also not taking ourselves too seriously. Just enough seriousness to demonstrate that we are being serious, and just enough humor to demonstrate that we're everyday people. We're not going to pretend that we're some magical people up on a hill ordering everyone like we're gods from above. We're not. We're people just like you. We just have ideas. So that's why I got into that.
Can you give me some cool stories from the campaign trail?
Well, there are two different types of cool stories. One are like inspiring stories, and one are like, I can't believe that happened. Well, I'll give you one of each.
Give me one of each. That's a perfect.
On the
perfect
campaign trail, I met a woman. I'd heard of her before, but I actually got to meet her and work with her. And her name is Kara Schultz. Kara Schultz is a city councilwoman in a town called Burnsville, Minnesota, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. She's a libertarian. She's an elected libertarian official in a city council in a fairly large suburban community. But that's not the real exciting story or the real inspiring story. Kara ran in and I may be getting these numbers wrong, I think in 2014 she ran the first time. And she got very close to it. She knocked on doors. She did all the work, but she was outspent and running against an incumbent, and she lost. And then in either 2016 or 2018, she decided she was going to run again. And either right as she began to run or right before, she was told that she had end-stage cancer and that she was going to die soon and that she needed to get her affairs in order. And she said, okay, I'm going to run for city council. And so in the middle of chemo treatments and what she was told was end-stage terminal cancer, she knocked on hundreds of doors across her community, I believe over 1,000 doors. She would sometimes pass out knocking on doors and waking up and going back to knocking on doors. She did this for months and she won. And then her cancer went into remission. And if you met her and didn't know her story, she is the most down-to-earth, nonchalant, kind, give you the shirt off her back person that you would ever meet. And meanwhile, she is the kind of person that the future movement of the libertarian movement, not just the Libertarian Party, but just the liberty movement in general, it's her shoulders and people like her that people are standing on. I think my story is inspiring. I can't imagine that I'd be able to do what she did. And she did. She's this tall, this little unassuming Minnesota woman, and she did something gargantuan task. So that's that story. My other favorite story is in where is it? In Huntington Beach, California, just outside of LA. We did an event during the bus stop. We did a bus tour across the country, and so I'm on my bus, coming off the bus, and I do this tour. And what we would do is we'd have a few local people running for office because that was the main push, is spotlighting people who had a serious chance of winning their races. And so some local people, local libertarian celebrities and local libertarians running for office spoke. And then I was the final act. I got up and spoke, and I gave my 10-minute stump speech. But my thing was I would do like an hour plus of Q&A. And back then, I wouldn't stop answering questions until they stopped asking them. And at this place, we had something probably like at least a couple hundred people there. And so, there's like 50, 60 questions. And I answered every single last one of them. It took about an hour and a half. And it probably longer, actually. One of these questions was a lady who said, and I knew it wasn't going to end well when she started by saying, Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for coming out. I know that you are a highly educated doctor. And I started to interrupt her to say, actually, I barely made it out of high school. I'm not a doctor. I don't know why. I'm just because I'm Jewish doesn't mean I'm a doctor. And then while I'm saying that, then I realized there was no need to interrupt her, because then she began to inform me that she was the only remaining living character from the Bible, and that she could prove this because someone painted a painting of her in the 1700s, which I'm not sure what that would have to do with the Bible, but someone painted a painting of her in the 1700s called the Red Woman or the Fire Woman or something like that. And if you look at it, it's a dead ringer for her. It's clearly her, and that proves that she's from the Bible. And then she started telling me this very interesting story about how the Illuminati and her ex-husband and that they were working with Satan to do to send her to hell or something like that. Now I'm standing in between my tour bus, the Jorgensen Cohen tour bus, on a podium, looking very official in a suit. In between that and her and 200 people who are all laughing or trying not to laugh. Now I've got to hold it together because there are news cameras there. I can't start laughing at this poor woman. So I start drinking water. I'm doing the Marco Rubio. I'm just drinking water. I'm making eye contact with her. And I thought, if you drink water, you can't laugh because you've got water in your mouth. And I drank about 1.5 bottles of water while she continued her story. And then when there was a little bit of a pause, I said, listen, I'm going to go ahead and stop you. Your story sounds like the kind of heartbreaking stories we hear across the country. But I'm not going to lie to you. I'm running for a federal office. And what you've described sounds like more of a local issue. Satan is more of a local issue. And I hoped that would stop it. And then she said, and then I said, but if you stick around to the end, because I would always, do like selfies and autographs and stuff for people that stuck around. I said, if you do that, I'll be happy to listen to your story some more and see if there's any way I can help you. But Satan is typically a local issue. And she said, Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for promising to make sure that the FBI and the CIA or whatever get to the bottom of this. And I said, you're welcome. And people still talk about that. There were many people there. And so pretty much anytime I go to California, people are like, hey, you remember? I'm like, yes, I remember. I remember the biblical woman. So those are I guess my 2 stories from the campaign.
Those are great stories. So, not to spoil anything for anybody who's watching this, but you lost.
Yes. We came in 3rd. I'm a bronze medalist. Yeah.
It's a good way to look at it.
I never got the medal, but I if there had been a podium, I would have been on it.
I can't even get over that. I can't get over that because I've been on so many of those, responder calls where somebody's telling me about the fall of the Roman Empire and, how they were once, Cleopatra's cousin. And mental health is a real serious struggle in America.
It is. And that's why I didn't want to laugh or whatever else. Because I thought, okay, this is one of 2 things. Either this person is dealing with serious mental health issues and I'm not going to be able to solve this in this moment. All I can do is try to alleviate her concerns in that moment. Or she's pranking me. And the funniest pranks are the ones where the person, doesn't lose it in front of the thing. They kind of hold their composure through it. So I'll be this person's foil if I'm being candid camera. And honestly, to this day, I don't know which it is. I don't know if that was all a goof for some local thing or, I'm on a YouTube channel where, VP candidate talks to, biblical woman. But whichever it was, I thought the best thing I can do right now is to be kind, to not be seen as me trying to rush her or to make fun of her or to laugh at her, but to simply address her concerns as best I could while not letting this whole thing, crumble, the rest of this Q&A session crumble. And I feel like I did the best I could. She was happy with the answer and she went about her day. So.
Well, one of those things that I've found in dealing with folks who are struggling with mental health and mental illness issues is that if you just are kind and loving and listen, that solves a lot of the problem. Because most people don't want to listen to an individual who's speaking like that or is, not as logical in their cerebral cortex as we might be. And, one of those things is just being kind and loving. So I think that's a perfect answer.
I think there are a lot of people out there right now who are hurting a lot. And whether it's a full-blown schizophrenia or they're in the middle of a mental health crisis, a nervous breakdown or something, or what I think often happens is it started as a very severe nervous disorder or mental health disturbance, but because no one is talking to them and because they're increasingly just talking to themselves and whatever thoughts they're having in their head, it just it metastasizes and gets worse and worse and it festers. And now here they're trying to desperately talk to people and they sound like, they sound scary. And so if you're able to just be kind and listen and talk with them and even if you can't help their situation, even if you walk away saying, you know what, I wish you the best on dealing with the Martians or Cleopatra or the fall of Rome or whatever, but you listen to them, it's no skin off your back. Unless you're a mental health professional, you're not going to be able to diagnose them. You're not going to be able to say, oh, actually what you should be doing is this and this. The best thing you can do is just listen to them. And if you're close enough to them where you can talk and say, I think that some of these things, might be something that you need to get help for, then that's one thing. But if it's a stranger and they're just, talking nonsense to you, you give them the 2 minutes and have the conversation with them. If nothing, it just alleviates them and makes them feel like someone cared about them. It's the same way that we wouldn't say if someone's leg was broken. We wouldn't say, well, they really should just walk over there. Maybe you help them over because they need that help. So I'm a big fan of listening and being kind, even if it is to say, are you sure that's true? Maybe we should have, maybe there's someone you can talk to about this or something like that. But be kind and listen. There's so much that is dealt with by being an outlet for someone, because a lot of people don't have an outlet.
Agreed. You want to talk about how we parlayed all the stuff, the podcast, the 2020
Sure.
campaign, into the advocacy work, the You Are the Power work, because I've seen you help a homeless shelter that was being threatened to be shut down. I've seen you help a disabled veteran who lost his dog to some police brutality.
Yep.
I've seen you help our friend out in Oklahoma City who's trying to do some harm reduction work. I've seen you help a lot of these very noble causes that are often underserved and underseen.
Yep.
So can we talk about how you kind of parlayed your newfound fame into purpose?
Sure. So part of my purpose work was what we talked about. I discovered what drove me. But another part of that is, what am I good at? Well, my career, I have been good at identifying problems, whether it's identifying the problem of a client who needed a better marketing plan for their business, or someone who didn't even have a business plan and needed help developing that so they could develop their business into something profitable, or whatever else I was working on. Find the glaring errors, find the issues, come up with a game plan to deal with them, and then do those things, or empower other people to do those things. And I basically applied that to the liberty movement when I got into it. Here are the problems with messaging. Here are the consequences we're facing as a problem, as a result of the problems that we have with our messaging, our strategy, or lack thereof, our tactics, our lack of morale, and all of those things. Here's what's happening as a result of it, and here's how we can change. And so what I saw, even before the campaign, but certainly during and after the campaign, coming into 2021, I realized that the problem we had was that we were talking about societal problems from a philosophical standpoint, because that's typically how most liberty-minded people are wired. We are typically more cerebral. We look at systems. We can look at a chart and have an emotional reaction to it because we can tie that to what it's telling us. Most people can't do that. Most people, you have to tell them a story. Most people, you have to meet them on something they care about and show them where that is, and then take that journey with them on how to fix it. We've often not done that, or not done it very well. A consequence of that is the increasingly dystopian nightmare that we live in, right? The fact that the only people who, at least in our minds, have the real solution to these things aren't presenting it in a way that connects with I call them the normies, but with the rest of the public, is the consequence of that is that they continue supporting these other solutions, which are no such thing. And as a result, people are hurting now. Also, as a result, within the movement, there's a lot of infighting over who's to blame for the fact that we haven't done as well as we'd like to do. There's a lot of nesting and saying, oh, well, the rest of the public isn't ready for our ideas, and they're a bunch of morons, and shake their fists at the sky and say the world is doomed to live this way. And so it's just a bad thing all around. Well, what's the solution to that? Well, let's look at the problems. The problems are we have people that are hurting. We know how to help them. Sometimes it's just helping them. You mentioned the homeless shelter. Sometimes it's just helping people and showing that we care. Sometimes it's that someone has been harmed. For example, a homeless veteran that the police brutalized him and tased his service dog, or a pastor who's running a homeless shelter and the local government shuts it down because they need a homelessness crisis to try to apply for state or federal money to fix the crisis that they help create. Or a woman whose home burns down and the zoning board tries to kick her off her property because she's living in a temporary RV and they want to steal her land for pennies on the dollar. Or a convalescent home that the local government is trying to use eminent domain to seize the property for beautification because they all happen to own the adjacent properties and want the value to go up and want to get rid of that unsightly eyesore of mentally deficient older people who are living together. When people like that need help, We know how to fix it. We know the policy solutions that would fix that. And we know how to organize people to fight for justice for those things. And so here we have an opportunity to use those things, not just to help those people, that's the most important thing right there, but then to use that as an opening conversation for other people who will have emotional connections to these stories, meet them where they are in their communities and on things they care about, and use that as an opening conversation about how the problem isn't just this thing. The problem is that those people in those positions of authority and power had the ability to do it in the first place. And we can fix that by removing that power from them and putting it back in your hands. And I spent the first part of 2021 telling people in the liberty movement, this is what we need to do. And then one day I realized I'm telling them to stop talking and to do it instead. And here I am talking about it. Maybe I should take a dose of my own medicine. I'm someone who has started organizations. I know how to do startups. I know how to raise funds. I know how to do all this stuff. So that's what I did. And starting in May of 2022, after a few proof of concept cases that were wildly successful, we officially launched my nonprofit, which is called You Are the Power. And that is exactly what we do. We meet people where they are. We help them now. We help them to organize for the justice they deserve and the accountability that the people who harm them deserve. And we use that as an opening conversation, not just to get people organized around a cause, but to explain to them how our solutions, our long-term liberty-based solutions, make it so that these things never happen in the first place. And I'm happy to do it. It is among the most fulfilling things I've ever done in my life.
Do you want to talk about some of the successes you've had so far with You Are the Power?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the early ones that we had, and I had mentioned it briefly a moment ago, was a woman in Indiana who her home burned down, and her insurance company, while they were going through the months-long, I think over a year-long process of getting the assessment of the value of her home and belongings and finding the contractors and negotiating out the work. It takes a long time, and she doesn't have a home. It was burned down to the foundation. And so they put her in they call it a Four Seasons home. It's basically an RV, but it's perfectly acceptable. It's not a lush way of living, but it meets their needs. It's serviceable. And the zoning board, who desperately wanted to take her property and any other property they could get, they met and voted to, they decided to issue her fines, daily fines, for having 2 residences on her property. Now, one of those residences was burned to the very foundation. But technically, she had 2 residences. She had a foundation that was burned to, everything on it was burned to a pulp, and then her RV. And when that didn't work, they started, routinely calling CPS on her and saying her children were living in substandard conditions. It went into a whole thing. And basically what they were trying to pressure her to do was just give up her land and leave. And apparently this is a problem in Indiana. It's not just local to that area, but they were doing what is very common in many parts of the country, abuse of condemning properties in order to seize property from people and just get them to move somewhere else. Now it's someone else's problem. And she reached out to local media and got a couple of stories out there, but that's really all that happened with it. But it was from her putting out the news stories that our activists found out about it. And we worked with some activists there and also with the local Libertarian Party, first on social media to drive attention to it and to get people around her rallied around her cause, with the idea that we would then do some in-person events, show up to zoning board meetings and so forth, and try to get them to back off. Turned out we didn't need that. They temporarily backed off, and then ultimately, with the help that they were able to get, thanks to us and others, to get legal counsel, they were able to successfully fight it in court, and just a few months ago, they moved into their home for good. So that was an early success. And so we've had many success stories, big and small, like this across the country, and we're just getting started. And I'm so excited for 2023, what we're going to be doing.
You want to talk about whatever you're helping Drew with?
Drew Cook is a dear, dear friend of mine. He lives in Oklahoma, and he had an addiction problem as well. And unfortunately, unlike me, his story was a lot more like yours. He ended up in jail. He ended up doing some time. He ended up getting in a lot of trouble related to his addiction. Thankfully, he was able to get clean. He's now been clean for years now. And in that time, not only has he gotten clean, but he's discovered what his purpose is. His purpose is to help people who are in addiction, very much like your purpose, help people in addiction to realize even before they get clean that they still matter right now, because that was his big problem. He felt worthless when he was addicted. He felt like he didn't matter. He disliked himself more than anyone who looked at him and saw some junkie thought of him. He thought much worse of himself. And he realized that the first step for many people is realizing that even one person gives a damn about them. Even if they don't give a damn about themselves, one person cares about them. And so he started an organization. It was called Out of Harm's Way OKC, but then they found out there was another nonprofit called Out of Harm's Way, so they now call it Shred the Stigma. Same organization. We help them get their 501(c) status. And here's what they do. They create these harm reduction kits. And in them are things like sterile needles, single package needles, alcohol swabs, fentanyl testing kits, Narcan. I think they even put like snacks and stuff in it. But what also, condoms and things like that. But what also comes in it is some literature saying that they matter, that they care about them, that no matter what they choose to do, that, you know, that they have value, and letting them know that if they do want to get clean, that this organization, Shred the Stigma, would be happy to help them find the resources they need, not just to get clean, but to get the help they need, to get affordable housing that they need, to get job training that they need, to help someone clean their record if they need, or whatever else that they need, that they will help them. If they want to stay here, that's fine. We will give you whatever it is you need to be able to do this as safely as possible. But when you're ready to take that big step and get clean, we'll help you not just getting clean, but through the whole thing. And you have people that care about you who will walk you through it. They have already saved over 180 people from dying from overdose or from fentanyl. And they've helped dozens of people to get clean already. They've been doing this for less than a year. This is the kind of work that people can do when they figure out what their purpose is. It could be that, it could be what I'm doing, it could be what you're doing, it could be some other thing all entirely different. It is a multiplicative factor of how many lives you can affect once you get good with yourself and you know what it is you want to do. You can't count the dozens, hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people that you'll be able to help in ways large and small, and the people they'll be able to help once they're in a better place. There's a tremendous amount of healing and regeneration that happens, but it starts internally. As with all things, everything starts with us ourselves figuring out, who am I? What do I care about? What am I good at? What drives me? If money didn't matter, what would I do with the rest of my life? And if I'm in a situation where I do need money, okay, great. Now how do I figure out a way to make a living doing this, right? And so that's what Drew's done. And Drew is an absolutely incredible person. He's like you. I mean, literally, when I think of you and I think of Drew, it's the same exact story. I think of two incredible men who have reclaimed their lives and are now helping countless other people to reclaim their lives so they can help countless other people to reclaim their lives. This is what I live for. And I love his story. I love your story. And it's what I live to do.
I can't stop smiling over here because Drew, I met him through his podcast as well, because everybody except for me has a podcast. And like Drew was pre this. I mean, he was really just trying to figure out what his purpose was. And I had some awesome conversations with him and got to know him just as the incredible guy you were talking about, and what he's been able to do in Oklahoma City by saving those people and really giving education along with it. Yep. Love and education and opportunity. Those are the three things that really make the world. It's for me and for you. So I haven't stopped smiling through this whole interview. And
Well, listen, I want to brag about you now. Okay, so here's the story of a guy who also had addiction issues and who also got in legal trouble and who himself got clean, and then who realized, now that I'm clean, what can I do to help others? What was it that got me where I am? And what are the things I can do to adjust those conditions so that the people who are at that make and break moment get a diversion opportunity? And what's interesting about what you do is that you're not just addressing the problem that those that are facing addiction deal with. You're addressing the problem that those who face deciding what the rest of their life is often going to look like, how they address it, and what they're dealing with. You're dealing with police officers who have been a combination of being propagandized about who and what drug addictions and drug addicts are, but who also have seen some pretty rough things. And that, coupled with the propagandization and coupled with the fact that in any war, the first step is to dehumanize the enemy. And that's very true with the war on drugs. And so now you have police officers who are seeking to protect their communities. They're seeking to, I'm not talking about the bad cops, I'm talking about the good cops. They're seeking to protect their communities. They're thinking about when they see a junkie or a drug addict, they are thinking of someone who poses a potential existential harm to them, their loved ones, people in their community, and they think, I got to do whatever I can to get this terrible person off the streets. What you do with your program is you go in and say, hey, we got a way to make sure that junkie never deals with you or anyone else again. In fact, that junkie, we're going to make that junkie into a productive member of society, and you can help. And you show them that they have an opportunity, instead of having to do all that paperwork, instead of having to deal with some potential threat to their well-being and having to file a bunch of paperwork because they had to tase them or shoot them or use force on them and face someone threatening them with a lawsuit or a settlement because of excessive force or whatever. Instead, they can call one of your responders to come out and have a very frank discussion with this person and say, hey, look, pal, you want to go with this guy and have a criminal record and deal with that? Or do you want to go with us and get some help and we can get you back on your feet and help? But the beauty of that is not just that. You then encourage the officer to stay in touch with the addict, or with now the recovering addict, under the auspices of, we're going to make sure this junkie's doing the right thing. But what you're doing, and I figured it out as soon as you said it, what you're doing is that officer now has a personal relationship with someone that they once looked at as a potentially or possibly actually very violent or potentially violent drug addict, who now isn't that, and is instead someone who's reclaiming their life. And it turned out that's what they always were. And you've told me the stories of the people that are now meeting for Christmas and Thanksgiving dinner, and they keep in touch with each other. Their families are like, they're almost like in-laws now. They stay in touch and everything else. You're not just reclaiming the lives of the victims of the war on drugs. You're reclaiming the lives of the soldiers in the war on drugs. You're showing them that there's a better way to deal with this problem. And it is a problem. Those who want to pretend that drugs and drug addiction are not a problem are not living in the real world. If they're going to use corporal force, here's the best way to do it. And you've provided that with second chances and with blueprints. And I just think of, all I can think of is, as that expands, not just in your area, not just in your county in Lancaster, and not just in Pennsylvania, but across the country, yours and similar programs like it, we have the ability not just to help get people off the streets and get them the help they need, because as we know, it's not just drug addiction, it's mental health, it's physical health, chronic pain, familial issues, PTSD, trauma, prison, criminal record, all those things. Start addressing those things and healing people and reclaiming lives, but also the people who were convinced that these were basically the detritus of society. No, these are just human beings that something got messed up. It often wasn't their fault, and even if it was their fault, we all make mistakes. And we can unmake that mistake, and we can reclaim it, and you can be a part of that. I think that's the most beautiful thing on earth, and I love you, and I'm so grateful that you do the work that you do. You won't ever know. It's not possible for you to know the sheer number of lives that you will be saving, both directly and indirectly.
That's a hell of an endorsement, man. Thank you. I don't even look at it that way. It's just like I was a lost kid. And everybody kind of looked at me like I was just on that vicious cycle where I was never going to get better, and I was a, hopeless junkie and homeless, and there was no way to fix me. And I believed it. I felt it. Society kind of shoved it on me, and I accepted it wholeheartedly because I didn't realize there was another way. And as soon as I realized there was another way, it kind of became goal, just a personal goal to make sure that as few people as possible have to feel that, because it's disgusting to feel like an animal and to be thrown in, monochrome colored clothing and tossed into a dirty cage. There's nothing okay about that, especially when you have a medical problem that we have treatment for.
Yes.
Just thank you.
It would be, well, thank you. You're the one doing it. I'm just telling you what you did.
Yeah, but thank you for agreeing.
Well, yes,
that humans are humans.
I am happy to agree that you're doing a good thing. No, listen, I'll equate it to like someone breaking their leg or something. We wouldn't say, look at this scumbag limping around, living off our tax dollars because he can't work and he lost his house, or he can't get into his house because he can't go upstairs, and so now he's living on the lobby and the floor. What a scumbag. Like, we wouldn't do that. We'd say, wow, this person has a broken leg, they need help with it, and we'd take them to a hospital and get them help or whatever else. Obviously, addiction very often is harder than that. It's not just as easy. Often, it's not just as easy as getting them clean one time, because there's so many other issues that are wrapped up in it: mental health issues, PTSD, familial issues, criminal issues, and all sorts of stuff. Like there's often so many different things, and it just remanifests itself into that. But one of the biggest ones, and we have studies to show this. There was a rat study that was done a long time ago, and I forget what the drug was they used with the rats.
It was cocaine.
Was it cocaine? Yeah. Okay, so you know what I'm saying. Yes. Okay, well, for those who don't know, they did a study, and they basically had two different groups of rats. Both of them were being given cocaine. And one group, the rats were in isolation from one another. And they would be given cocaine whenever they would press a thing or whatever, or would get whatever. They had an ability to get feedback where they'd say, I want cocaine, and then they get it. The ones that were living in isolation, they just used cocaine until they died. Sound familiar? The other group had lived in a typical social environment like a typical rat would live. I'm not going to pretend to know what rat social environment. I assume white picket fence and so forth. But they're in this a more typical rat environment where they're with other rats and they can scurry about. I wish I could pretend I knew what rats do. But they were living their best rat life, and they could get cocaine whenever they wanted. Now, old me thinks, wow, best life I could ever live and cocaine? What a dream. But the reality is they did the same thing I did. Those rats said, I think I'm done with the cocaine. They'd do it once or twice. Some might get addicted, but for the most part, they just stopped. And that's what I did. I'm just like those rats. I literally said, I got this great life and all these people that love me. And one of the only things hindering me is this stupid drug thing. I didn't even call it an addiction. I didn't even think it was an addiction. It was getting in the way. I realized it was getting in the way. That's what happens when someone feels like someone cares about them. And I didn't even have a purpose yet. I just knew I had a future. I knew that there was something that I mattered to other people and that I could do something with my life. Even though I didn't even necessarily know what it was yet, that was enough for me to go, I don't need drugs anymore. There are many people that the first step is going to require just someone telling them they matter. And what if the person telling them they matter is the officer who could have ruined their life instead? Roughed them up, tased them, put them in cuffs, put them in jail. Their mugshot goes up on the local paper and the Facebook page, and everyone goes, look at that scumbag. I always thought he was a prick. And then he goes to jail, and everyone's happy about it because, that drug addict, and now he's got a criminal record. That'll definitely help him, right? And what if instead that same officer goes, I've seen this before, they call second chances. Or some other organization in another state. They call someone who comes out and says, how'd you like to get help? Because we care about you. You can go to jail if you want. We will not stop you from remaining an addict and going to jail. How'd you like to get help? Because we care about you and we want you to do better. It's night and day. It is like I said, you will never know. It is impossible to know, because then those people go on and help people. You help people, right? Whatever it took for you to get help, now you're helping people. How many of those people end up making their own second chances somewhere else, or something completely different for some other group of people that needs help? Some drug addict who goes and makes an organization that helps people who need help because their local government's harming them, right? It's impossible for you to know, for any of us to know, once we find our purpose, how many lives, both directly and indirectly, we can save and make much better.
So admittedly, your recovery story or your addiction story was not sexy, as you put it.
It's not the typical, yeah.
But For the folks who are struggling with addiction right now and don't even realize it,
Yeah.
because their addiction struggle isn't, quote, sexy, what do you have to say to them?
Well, first, I will answer that, and then I'll go back to the other thing. But what I would say to them, to people that are struggling with addiction right now and don't even know it, is if you have any question as to whether or not you could stop doing what the thing is, try to stop doing it for a week or a month. Start with a week. That thing that I do it a lot and I do it every day and I feel really bad when I don't do it, but I have a career, I have a family, I have loved ones, everyone, people care about me, everything's going well. I'm not a drug addict. I know what drug addicts look like. Try a week. Go a week. And if it turns out you can't go a week, that's okay. That's the first step. Now you know that there is a problem there. And now maybe you have to do more to be able to go a week. If you have a problem, it doesn't change those other things. Because that was another thing with me. I thought, if I'm a drug addict, that means that I'm not going to have a career and I'm not going to have loved ones and I'm not going to have this and that. That's all stuff we tell ourselves. You still have the loved ones. You still have the career. You still have the things that convinced you that you don't have addiction. That's actually an incredible thing. You've been able to manage to have an incredible life even with addiction. What a testament to how you are as a person. Now imagine what you could do without it. Imagine what you could do free of that thing. So I challenge you, try a week. And if you go a week and everything's great, go another week. Go a month. And who knows? Maybe it's not. Maybe you can be a social drinker. Maybe you can smoke a joint every now and then. Much harder than that, I would question what you could do. But, who knows? Maybe you can. Maybe you decide you want to go a few months at a time and not do it. That's up to you. But if you have a hard time with that week or that second week, that's good. That means that you learned something. And it doesn't nullify who you are as a person. It doesn't reverse any of that other stuff. It just means you now know what the problem is. And there are many, many resources that can get you the help you need. And I know you can do it because you've been able to do so much even with that. And if you think about all the stuff that you can do without it, that just tells you know what to do next. And I believe in you. You can do it.
What would you say your greatest blessing of recovery has been?
The greatest blessing that I have had through my addiction journey, and my recovery journey, through my MS journey, through my completely recreating myself from the ground up journey, through my political journey, the greatest blessing I have had, and there are so many I've had, incredible, my parents have been incredible, my social support network, my friends, my family, my loved ones have been great, but without hesitation, the greatest blessing I've had is my wife, Tasha. She has been with me in times when, looking back, no one would have blamed her for leaving. Now, I was never physically abusive. I never cheated. I never, did anything terrible like that. But I was just a person that no one would want to be around. And she wasn't sticking around with me because she, needed to be there. She did it because she loved me and she knew I could do better. And she never tried to fix me. She just kept reminding me that I didn't have to do this and that I knew what I needed to do to change things. And didn't make it any less annoying when she was doing it, but in retrospect, it was exactly what I needed. I had someone that was not going to enable me. They were not going to sit down with me in my pity party and tell me how right I was, but they also weren't going to beat me up. They were just going to say, I love you, I'm here for you, you can do better. You know that it doesn't have to be this way. You know what you need to do. And looking back, I don't know why she stayed, but I hope that I am more than making up for it now. And I could not be more grateful for her. And I love you, Tasha. I know you'll watch this at some point. And this isn't the first time you've heard it, but you're super hot. And I don't know what you see in me in any way. But I hope I'm making you happy now. And I could not be more grateful for you. One of the things that I do on a regular basis every night, I write down at least 3 things that day that I was grateful for. And sometimes it's like 15 things. Like on a tough day, I eke out 3 things. On some days, it's like 30 things. And I'm looking through, and then at 12:30, this happened. And without fail, every single day, there is at least a third to half the things are related to something related to Tasha. So again, I love you, baby. Thank you so much for being in my life.
Thank you, Spike, for letting us snowbird with you in Myrtle Beach for a couple days. I think what I took most from this interview and this episode is that recovery comes in all shapes and sizes. You don't necessarily have to have hit the absolute bottom of the barrel to be able to experience a new and profound life in recovery. Next up, we're going to be heading to Nashville, Tennessee to meet with my friend Mike Miz, who is a recording artist, a musician, and he has a tremendous recovery story, so I cannot wait to get down there to bring this episode to you.